Hey everybody, today I'm going to be going over why most stock indicators are a scam. And I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of videos that show like, oh, this stock indicator will guarantee you to predict exactly where the price is going to move, or it's going to tell you right when to buy or right when to sell whatever stock you're holding. And there's a lot of people that make these videos, and it'll be something really, really basic or simple like RSI, convergence, MACD crossover, super trend, something along those lines, where it will be a very basic indicator that really doesn't show much information at all other than just a little bit of a pattern. And they'll sell these videos as this works 90% of the time, huge profits, and you'll be a way more successful trader. And 99% of the time, that is not true. So, indicators can be a useful tool for helping to confirm something that you're already suspecting, but it should never be your first tool. Very specifically, it should never be your first, and it should never be used to confirm something either. Um, so we're going to get into a couple of different indicators that I've personally found that get covered by a lot of these um, hype YouTubers that just talk about how much money you can make and how successful it is and how it never doesn't work. So we're going to get into a couple different ones and go through what they actually do, what actually happens with them, and why it's usually a little misleading. So make sure to subscribe and let's get into it. All right, so these are the three things that I really want to focus on first: RSI, MACD, and Super Trend. You'll see those a lot, and while they do have some patterns that definitely do help with purchasing and investing, it's not necessarily the greatest way to decide what you're going to buy. For example, a lot of people use them for day trading, and day trading can be very volatile. I mean, I've done it for years, and you've no idea how many times I've been trying to use a MACD or RSI crossover, and it completely does not work. And what these YouTubers will do is they'll find places in charts that perfectly set up the indicators to show, like, oh, this happened, and the indicator worked perfectly then, so it'll work this time too. And while it does happen sometimes where the indicators will perfectly predict something, MACD crossover really low and the stock shoots up and continues going up, and that's perfectly okay, and that does happen. But it will not happen 50% of the time or more, probably more than that. So I'm going to get into each one of these individually, and we'll just go through some examples. And I'll honestly probably just go into a random stock chart, pull up RSI, pull up MACD, and just show this is where it worked, this is where it didn't work. And one other thing to note is hindsight is 2020. So I could be showing these charts, or any other YouTuber could be showing these charts, and it'll be from yesterday or a week ago. And in real time, you will not see these patterns playing out. You might see the MACD dipping low and then it crosses over, and then the stock can drop and it crosses back over. And there's nothing that will warn you before that happens. So we're going to go into examples of each and every one of these. And one thing really quick I do want to point out, I know I used screenshots from Trading Labs channel in the beginning. I do really love that channel, and they have a lot of very good educational videos for trading. I just used their screenshots because they do a lot of stock indicator videos, and I just personally don't agree with relying on indicators for trading strategies. So nothing against them at all. They have an excellent channel, a lot of educational resources and things like that, but that's just the screenshots I used. So anyway, let's get into it. We're going to go over all three of these and see what they're all about. All right, everybody. So this is a few examples of where I've found, at least in the past 5 minutes, just of places where these indicators have completely gone wrong. So, for example, right here, RSI is fairly high and there was a downwards crossover. Unless you had a time traveling ability and were able to see this before it happened, you missed the 5% drop, because if you were waiting until it crossed over, you would have missed the main drop because of this candle. And then it just went right back up. So I know this is the daily chart, but the exact same patterns happen on the smaller time frames as well. It's all just hindsight, things like that. Another thing that you could say right here is that it crossed over above and immediately went down too. But again, right here is another example where RSI was kind of in the middle a little bit, crossed over, immediately went back down, and then continued down. Two more examples. Right here, you can see it was a downwards crossover. And again, unless you had hindsight and you bought, you can see the crossovers in between these two candles. If you bought here, which is when it would have been confirmed, the stock was already down. And as soon as you were in it, the chances of you somehow making a profit between these 2 days with it going down is fairly low. And then here, once again, you can see it crossed over right here. And as you can see, again, the crossovers between these two candles. So the 4% profit that comes with this candle, it did go up the next day and stayed flat and then went down. Again, a little bit of a possible profit here, but overall, it crossed over above and stayed flat, went down. So these are just a couple examples of where I've found that RSI can be a little shaky and why you should never use this as your first confirmation of a trade. Now, say you were doing a long-term trade and we went to the weekly chart and NVIDIA's RSI was at 35 and it crossed over, then I would say, that's probably a decent idea. Another example right here, even if you bought right here and you were holding it long term, generally these work fairly well long term. Now, one thing to note with a company like NVIDIA is it was up really high, crossed over downwards, and then just continued to go up. Again, crossed over downwards, and don't get me wrong, there was a big drop, but continued to go up higher and higher. So there are some things to note with doing this long term as well. It works when the company is a bit flatter, for example, in this range, when it was down low and it went up. But when it's in a very clear, strong uptrend, it is not as solid. Even if you're buying here, you may have caught the 13% down day profit, possibly, but you also may have not and waited for the confirmation of the crossover and then missed it completely. So it's a hit or miss thing. Now, again, the next thing I want to go over is MACD, where this is Meta's chart from their historic run as well. And another thing I want to highlight is these indicators generally do not work with strong trends in one direction. So, for example, here you can see a MACD crossover right here going downwards. The stock stayed flat for a bit and continued up. And again, right here is one of the strongest examples I have of this, where the MACD was up very high, actually. It was almost at 30 and crossed over towards the downside and only went up, essentially. After the crossover, it essentially only went up a little bit of flat, but other than that, it stayed up. Now, did it drop eventually? Yes, 4 months, almost 4 months later, 3.5 months later. So that is another thing to think about. And again, 3.5 months later, do you want to be in a stock that has been essentially rising or staying flat for 3 months when you're betting on it going down? So if you're looking in hindsight and the chart looks like this, and you think it's going down and it only goes up, as you can see from the very corner of my screen, and then it starts going down, and then it goes down and back up. So it's really just a hindsight thing. Now, again, proving these indicators wrong is another hindsight thing that you also have to take into account. So that's why I'm stressing as much as possible that when you're getting into trading, when you're new, these should not be your number one things you're basing your trades off of. Don't get me wrong, they can help, but again, it's not the best idea to solely focus on them. And again, that's what I'm saying with a lot of these YouTube videos that are out where they say, oh, check out these high win rate indicators and technical indicators for stock trading and the best trading view indicator and whatever best RSI indicator, best indicators to use. They will say that and then use past charts, or it'll just be specific situations where it did work. For example, right here, you could see a very clear uptrend from the earnings report. Again, outside influence that is affecting this has very little to do with the actual indicator, dropped on the earnings report, and then only went up since then. So this entire uptrend that you could see here is completely red. Then it flips and then goes back down and then goes back up. So right now, for example, Meta is showing a red downtrend. If you look, experiencing positive money flows, favorable market sentiment towards the company. Now, again, that's not really an actual solid news thing, but the chances of Meta going down right now after having a fairly good earnings report are not that high. So it's showing red. If you're trading the indicator, you'll consider selling here, and it'll most likely continue going up. Now, again, that's not guaranteed. Another thing that you could look at is the MACD here and compare both of them and say, oh, the MACD is low with a possible crossover. That also kind of indicates going up, which goes against the super trend. Now, I don't really want to compare them specifically because using indicators in conjunction with each other is a whole other thing that I could go over in a future video, but I probably won't today. But it's just something to think about with super trend. For example, here you can see Meta essentially only went up, but in this range, there are 3 separate times where the super trend went red, but the stock is only going up. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some dips, but say you started shorting or selling or buying puts on these dips and were hoping for long-term gains, that would not really work out for you, especially here where the stock drops for 2 days and then just continues back exactly where it was and the trend meant nothing. Even here, it only went up. It went red and only went up in the red, especially here as well. It dropped for 2 days, broke the green super trend, and immediately just went up through the red. So these are just a lot of things that you should be thinking about when looking at these indicator videos, when looking into getting into investing for the first time. You just have to be aware that a lot of these only work in hindsight. A lot of these, their success rates are based on things that happened in the past. You do not know what they're going to do in real time. For all we know, Meta tomorrow, as it's showing red right here, could have another 20% day like it did right here. And then it'll blast through the red super trend here and continue green. And we just have no idea. So it's just something to think about where market conditions do not always affect the indicators. And you just need to be aware of that and try not to fall into these traps that a lot of clickbait style YouTube videos try to do. So that's all I have. Make sure to subscribe. I hope you learned something. I hope you got out of this. I really wasn't trying to call out any specific channels with like clickbaiting or giving bad information, but it's just something I've learned in the multiple years of learning the hard way with stock trading. So that's about it. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.